All right, so here we're going to start with our AP flour. We're going to use 270 grams. We also want to, prior to mixing, we want to activate our yeast. So we have here our instant dry yeast along with our sugar. Sugar is going to feed the yeast and allow it to activate and grow. What's going to happen through the fermentation process is that it's going to feed off the sugar and then it's going to create carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is what's going to help our bread rise, and it's also going to add some great flavor to our recipe. So the sugar is combined with our yeast, and we're going to add just a little bit of our water. So our whole recipe calls for 6 ounces of water. We're just going to pour in just a little bit of it, give it a good stir. And we're using water that is warm. So we don't want to use ice cold water and we don't want to use boiling hot water. We want to use something that's close to the temperature of bath water. So that's about 110 degrees. Okay, so we're gonna set this aside. And when we come back to it, we're gonna see lots of bubbles and know that our yeast is activated. So here we are with our AP flour. We want to add to that some salt. Salt is going to give flavor to our recipe. We want to go ahead and stir that up. Okay, so now our salt is completely mixed into our flour. Just jumping back here to looking at our yeast, so you can see there's lots of bubbles forming here. So that is the action of the yeast feeding off of the sugar. So we're going to take that and we're going to pour it into our recipe. Okay, and our next step is going to be to add in the rest of our warm water. And now we're going to start to mix. So at the beginning of the mixing process, you want to go slow so you don't have a big mess on your hands. Okay, and once you've brought it together in the bowl, and you can see it's getting a little too tough to work with in the bowl, I'm going to now switch and I'm going to knead this on the table. So what I'm going to need for that is some extra flour. So we're going to use a little bit of AP flour. We're going to dust our surface and we're going to take all of our dough out onto the table, making sure we get everything out of the bowl. Okay, and then from there we're going to start to knead. So what we're going to do is we're going to gather all the ingredients, kind of bring them together. And the dough should be a little tacky, a little sticky. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually start the kneading process where we're going to flip the dough over with one hand and push it out with the palm of our hand on our second hand. So I'm a righty, so I tend to flip it with my right hand and push it out with my left hand. So we're going to continue this process until all of the flour is incorporated and until we meet the proper texture of what we're looking for doneness. So you want to make sure that you don't add too much flour to the table. So it should be a little tacky, but it shouldn't be sticking. If you have a big wet mess here, then you'll need to add a little bit more flour or your recipe was not scaled properly. But if there's a little bit of tackiness, that's okay. We just don't want it to be too dry. So we're going to continue to do this process for about 5 minutes. So just to show you here, I can still see that there's a lot of texture to the dough. It's not completely smooth yet. So this is going to indicate that I still need to continue to knead the dough. Okay, so now we're back with our focaccia bread, and if you notice, it's expanded quite a bit in size. So this here is our fermentation process. Fermentation is when the yeast feeds off of the sugar and the flour, and it creates all these nice, beautiful gas pockets and it expands our yeast. So what's happening, or expands our dough. So what's happening is that flavor is being developed in our dough, and also the nice texture that we're looking for is being developed. So what we're gonna do now is we're actually gonna take this from the bowl and we're going to make a focaccia bread. We're gonna make a round one. You really can use any sort of dish that you want. So we're gonna use a pie tin or a pie dish. We're gonna put a little bit of olive oil at the bottom. Okay, and we're gonna just make sure that. So focaccia is actually known for the flavor also that it gets from the olive oil. So we're gonna, right now we're using a light olive oil, but I think we have an extra virgin olive oil. We'll use that too to help give some really great flavor. So I very gingerly took this out of the bowl because I don't want to knock the air out, because right now what I need to do is I need to press this dough out and create these little pockets. Okay, so if you notice how the dough spread out to fill the form or fill the dish here is just by me pressing down, and the dough naturally spread out on its own. These little pockets here are actually going to catch our extra virgin olive oil, as well as kind of hold on to the other ingredients that we're going to add to the top of it, which is going to be some rosemary and some garlic. So let's move on to prepping our rosemary and our garlic. So this here is some fresh rosemary that I grew in the garden. Really excited. I did this at the beginning of the school year, or of the summer, really honestly, for this recipe. So I'm really excited that we got to use it. So I'm gonna pick off all of the pieces of rosemary, and we're gonna do a rough chop. So I just wanna get rid of the stem and just have just the leaves of the rosemary. Super fragrant, really smelling great here. And also at the same time, while I'm doing this process, I also want to have my oven preheating. So I'm going to bake this at 75 until it's pretty much golden brown. So it could take about 15-20 minutes. So you'll take a look at your oven. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gather it all together, and then using my knife in a rocking motion, I'm going to go ahead and chop up my rosemary. Nice consistent size pieces. Oh, it's super fragrant. Okay. And then from here, I'm going to go back to my bread here, and I'll go ahead and I'll sprinkle this. So you use as much or as little rosemary as you like. You don't have to use all of it. The next thing that I'm also going to add, very common, is garlic, right? So rosemary, garlic. I'm just going to trim the end of my garlic off and take off the take off the skin, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start mincing it. So you can crush it if you want. You also can just start slicing it really thin. Okay, and to do a mince is just to make super small, fine pieces. So just rock your knife back and forth every so often, just bring everything together. Okay, you can go as fine as you like. Just always suggest that it be nice and consistent. You don't want to have anything too big that doesn't bake into your bread properly, because then it's going to end up being have a very raw garlic taste to it. So again, we're going to just kind of evenly spread it around. Again, use as much or as little as you like. Okay, and then the last part of what I'm going to do is I have some pretzel salt. So you can buy pretzel salt. You can also, sometimes I just save it from the bag or from some frozen pretzels if I have the extra left over. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle that on top so I get some nice crunchy salty flavor. And then I'm just going to take a little drizzle of the extra virgin olive oil so you can see how much darker this olive oil is. So it comes out, I can just show you here. Our extra virgin olive oil, you can see, is very golden in color, whereas if we look at our light olive oil, it's a little bit lighter in color. Okay, so this is gonna have some great flavor. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just put some plastic wrap on top. And I'm gonna set this aside for about another 10 minutes as my oven finishes preheating. And when I'm ready, I'll take the plastic off, I'll put it into the oven, and then I'll go ahead and I'll bake it until it's nicely golden brown. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna remove our plastic wrap from our focaccia. And you can see that it has had basically like a second proofing here. Let me see all those little bits of garlic and rosemary. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get this into our oven. Our oven has been preheated. Put it in. So we're just gonna take a quick peek in the oven to see how the focaccia bread is baking. I can see I have some nice golden color happening to my focaccia loaf. All right, so now we're gonna check our oven. To leave this focaccia bread in here just a little bit longer. It's getting nice and golden on top. I just wanna see a little bit more color on the bottom, but oh, it smells really delicious. Just a few more minutes on that. All right, so one final part that I want to show you for the focaccia bread. So again, it's known for the flavor that it picks up from the olive oil. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use our wonderful donations from Filippo Berrio that come through CCAP, our Careers Through Culinary Arts program, our partners. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to brush the olive oil on. So focaccia is not known for being a diet-friendly bread. Lots of carbs here, obviously. But what we're gonna do is by just using that little bit of olive oil, you can see how it really gives a nice, beautiful shine. It gives a little extra flavor. And that's actually going to help soften the crust a little bit because this is gonna be a nice, soft, textured bread. All right, so we're gonna give that again about 15, 20 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer to cool before we slice it, and then we'll come back and show you how to slice it. Okay, so what we're gonna do now that our bread has baked and has cooled, we're going to remove it from our pan. And now we're going to work on slicing the bread. So whenever you're slicing any sort of bread, you always want to first make sure that it's cool before you slice it. Because once you slice it open, air will now start to shorten the shelf life, right? So as it stays whole, it's gonna have its longest shelf life. Once you slice it open, it starts to dry out. We also want to use something called a serrated knife. So a serrated knife is indicated by the teeth that you see on the bottom here. This will allow us to do a sawing motion and cut through our bread. So I'm going to cut this in half. Notice my sawing motion. Okay, what you also might notice is that as I'm slicing through, I'm not crushing down on the bread, right? I'm sawing very gently so that I can cut open to the center of the bread. So what we're looking for here in our bread, we're looking for this nice tight crumb. It's a very soft bread. Remember, we had all that olive oil in there. It initially, when it first came out of the oven, had a little bit of a crust to it, and then we painted it with olive oil, so it definitely did soften it up. So there's that great flavor there. Then what I can do is I can go ahead and I can slice it further. Again, sawing motion. Okay. And I can cut this into 12 portions. So if I take my entire focaccia bread and cut it into quarters, right? Here's a quarter, here's a quarter, there's a quarter, okay? And then I take each of those quarters and cut them into thirds. That is how I can evenly create 12 portions from my bread. I can make focaccia in any shape or any size. If I wanted to make smaller rounds, I could use those smaller rounds as sandwich breads. I can make them in different shapes. I can, if I made them more into a rectangle, I can, slice them into longer strips. But here we have our nice rosemary focaccia and garlic bread.